Welcome everyone to the December 2020 Tanho Monday Textual Study. I'm your host, Shirley Paulson of Early Christian Texts, and our presenter this evening is Dr. Hal Taussig. In this study, we'll be talking about the Gospel of Mary. This is an ancient 2nd century text whose attractiveness is still on the rise since its discovery about 120 years ago. We'll focus tonight on what crucial meanings this text brings to our time. How does it engage readers spiritually? Just a gentle reminder that donations supporting the creation of these textual study archives are greatly appreciated. $5 to $10 per session per person is enough to keep us going. You can find the donation link and the text we're studying tonight, more information about past and future study sessions, as well as other archived recordings on the Early Christian Texts website by clicking the button on the homepage that says Tanho Monday Textual Studies. So I'm eager to hear what Hal has to say, and Hal, I'm going to turn you off of mute so you can talk now. Let's hear it, Hal. Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Shirley, for all that you do for us on these Monday nights, and thank you all for coming. It's, for me, an important longer-term journey that I'm on with the Gospel of Mary, and I have done a lot of academic work with the Gospel of Mary over the last 20 years, and in addition, I found myself in my own spiritual journey to be drawn to the Gospel of Mary, as well as many other extra-canonical texts. Tonight, I want to, as Shirley said, to really have us focus on questions for our own meaning-making in our day from the Gospel of Mary. That is, there's lots of fun to happen, and there's lots of interesting required study in the Gospel of Mary. But today I want to focus on major dimensions of the Gospel of Mary, which are basically already proving to be very important spiritually and theologically in our day. What I'm going to do is, as we do usually on these Monday nights, is basically talk for 5 to 10 minutes and then to stop and ask what you're thinking, what questions or what important learnings that you're having as we talk together for this hour. Let me just say a few words of the basics about the Gospel of Mary, and then we'll go fairly quickly to the meanings that the Gospel of Mary is making in our time. And we want to cross-examine whether the meanings are really there for people, and we'll want to explore deeply the possibilities of meaning-making in the Gospel of Mary. But the Gospel of Mary, as Shirley said, was discovered about 120 years ago and had a very slow start, mainly because 2 world wars. The Gospel of Mary was discovered by a German professor in Egypt, and as he brought the text back to Germany, the first thing that hit him in the middle of his working with the text was World War I. When World War I was over and he was continuing to basically do basic translation of the Gospel of Mary, it happened that near the end of his first book on the Gospel of Mary, or he thought it was, the pipes burst in his house and completely ruined what he had written and did a fair amount of damage to the text itself. When that got fixed and he restarted his work, he got very sick himself, and he did not last even until the Second World War, which also stopped the study of it. So it was only in the late 1950s that this text was brought to light by the first translations, first in German and then in English. The Gospel of Mary's main character is Mary. We think Mary Magdalene, but we're not completely sure, as one sometimes knows. In about 1/4 of all women in Galilee during the 1st and 2nd century were named Mary. We're not completely sure that this is Mary Magdalene, but probably. She is the leading apostle or follower of Jesus in this story. And we'll talk more about the main elements of the story. I want to say one other thing, that the Gospel of Mary as a text is a broken text. That is, that about 6 portions of the papyrus are missing. And so it's a broken text in that the whole story isn't there. However, the story is so powerful that it has drawn many people for both spiritual renewal and an intellectual quest. I'm going to stop right there to see if someone has something else to say about the basics of the Gospel of Mary or has a basic question.
This is Carla. Quick question. Carla. I probably just missed it. Where did you say these were found? The Gospel of Mary was discovered in Egypt. In Egypt.
Actually, it was in the marketplace. It was discovered. It was already for sale.
So the only connection to Germany is that a German bought it or found it?
Yeah, it was a German professor in the marketplace, who read Coptic, looked at it, and brought it home.
What a find at the marketplace.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of that going on, both falsified doctrine or documents and real ones.
I had a quick question, Hal. Aren't there 2 copies, or the second copy is just a fragment found at Oxyrhynchus?
It's a very small fragment, yeah.
Okay. And then the one that was found in the market, I read somewhere that the section that's missing, it looked like somebody actually had whipped it out. It's a kind of a clean cut, deletion of that section. And I wondered if you had heard that.
Oh, yes. And I've seen it. It's not sure whether that was ripped out or not, but the papyrus matches up in a way that one has to ask that question.
Thank you.
Janice here. This is probably silly, but how do they tell from the language that it's written by a woman?
That is not a major theory. Mary is the primary character in this text. She does not claim to have written the text. It's wide open who the author is. It seems to me like that makes some sense that it was a woman, but in the text itself, the person who speaks, primarily Mary, does not say, and by the way, I'm writing down this stuff down.
Okay.
Usually when we're trying to figure out who writes an ancient document in the Bible or outside the Bible, it's very hard to know an author's name. First of all, authors are not interested in giving their name to their books, by and large, in the ancient world. But so one has to basically say, what is the voice that we hear in this story? And it's in this case that it seems to me that, although I don't think I'll know for a long time the answer to who wrote this text, it does have a voice that knows about loss, strength, pain, and discrimination. So in other words, whoever is writing this book, and it could be more than one person, whoever is writing it has an inside feel in many ways for what it means to be a woman. So I want to talk a bit about some of the major dimensions of Mary as a message for our day. So I'm not going to be too much of a historian, but more of a theologian and a spiritual seeker. One of the main things that one has been really interested is what the message is of Jesus. So Jesus is a little bit of a character in the Gospel of Mary, but he's mainly on his way out the door. That is, Jesus has basically been killed. He reappears, and basically to say goodbye to a group of followers. And there he summarizes what his message is. And I'll read a little bit from that in chapter 4 of the text. Beware that no one lead you astray, saying, look over here or look over there. And here's where I think the key begins. For the child of humanity is within you. In other words, don't look over there, look over there. Actually, the child of humanity is within you. Follow it. Those who seek it will find it. Go then and proclaim the good news of the realm. Do not lay down any rules beyond what I determine for you, nor give a law like the lawgiver, lest you be confined by it. And then, when he said that, he left. Not like to go down the street, but forever. Just wanted to think a little bit then about this message. So it is a very similar in some ways to other Gospels in that the good news of the realm, or it could be translated good news of the kingdom or of God's empire, is present, and there is a presence of the child of humanity. Now, there's another translation for that, Son of God. That's more of a sexist translation. But the child of humanity is basically the same as the presence of the realm. And so it's a personal presence of the realm of God. And here, in both cases, the presence of the realm of God is there, and the child of humanity is within you already. Now, the you is plural. The child of humanity is within y'all. Would be the best translation of that. I'm going to stop here for a moment. Let us see whether this is a kind of message that we might be interested in our day to make crucial meaning for our time. The presence of the child of humanity. Now, isn't that a very interesting text in which this person is identified with larger humanity? And then the realm of God is full of good news. Think then about, is this a kind of meaning that has some possibilities? I'll ask you then, what would be in hearing this summary by Jesus to his followers of what he was about? What are some of the downsides or the upsides to that kind of message as far as you see?
I think when I read this, I can't help think of systemic oppression. When I read it, it seems to me that Jesus is telling them, do not return to the ways of Egypt, Greece, Rome, or the Pharisees. And so to me, the upside is that you do not go back to a system of oppression. Because systems, of hierarchy, of class, always end up oppressing somebody. Now, the downside could be, then what do we go back to? If we don't go to some kind of system of hierarchy or, of roles, what do we go back to? What did they know beyond that type of living? But that's what I hear, that the upside is, don't become what you've just been liberated from, but also be mindful that you don't end up in anarchy and, a spiritual anarchy.
Yeah. And I'm reminded then, Stephanie, of how that basic text is really worried about following rules.
Right.
That is, it says, don't follow rules.
Right.
Don't go down that path. So that is a key dimension to the good news of the child of humanity. Other things that other folks say or can see that are downsides or upsides to this kind of message?
As I see it, it is putting the responsibility on the individual, not kowtowing to an organization or feeling my church or synagogue or whatever is doing this and I'll just do a little part. It is saying, I am the Spirit of God. I am to take responsibility myself. Even if I follow patterns, it is up to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, I think, very much in the spirit of that, and sounds like an upside. The one thing I might add is that, again, the child of humanity is within you is plural. So, in other words, the presence of Jesus and of the divine message is actually not the individual, but the people together. Karen?
I was just realizing as you read this that it's no wonder that the message was suppressed, parts are missing, and it's not included with the canonical Gospels, because it is a direct threat to those who rule. Mm-hmm. So while it's empowering all of us to resist, I think it triggers that oppressive reaction that we face so often in our day to good news and the message to resist. So it's not particular to writing, but it triggered in me so much of the squelching of and systems and churches, the pressure in churches to toe the line and not resist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know you yourself are working pretty hard to make churches of another kind. So I'm going to go to the next kind of kernel of possible meaning for our day. And that's the next piece of the story in which, so Jesus has left, and then, as many of you know, if you've read the gospel, the followers of Jesus, as soon as he leaves, they start crying. And their main thing that they're really worried about is, they said, well, if they killed Jesus, what'll they do to us? And they are so bereft. And up stands Mary. And Mary turns and says, do not weep and be pained, nor doubt, for all his grace will be with you and shelter you. But rather let us praise his greatness, for he has prepared us and made us humans. When Mary said this, she turned their heart to the good. So I just want to notice then this next part of meaning that is present today, I think, for us in this gospel. That is, it shows the pain and the loss of the followers of Jesus and the despair of them. So it's very important, I think, for me, that a text help us acknowledge our pain and loss and hurt. And this text really does that. Then up steps Mary, and she's acting like the person who's basically in charge now. And she basically says to them, don't cry, because the message he just told us really works. And then I love this imagery. You will be sheltered. So here there's an address directly to those people who are hurt and lost and who have losses. And what she announces is really the same thing that Jesus has just announced, and that is shelter, the adventure of being a human, and the adventure of being good. So there, the combination of facing into hard times and getting someone like Mary to stand up and say, there is shelter for you, and there is a kind of deeper sense of humanity that is at the heart of goodness. So let's stop again and see whether, and I know that there are 62 of us tonight, and we won't get to all of you, but I want us to stop and think about, are there upsides and downsides to this kind of message for our time? Sandy?
Hal, I love what you've been sharing with us. And what occurs to me with your emphasis on the you plural is that in each of us, there is this spirit of this child of humanity, and we should look for that in one another.
Thank you, Cindy. Other questions about the viability of this, or ways that you can see some promise for you in your own spiritual search?
Well, okay. I'm thinking, I wanted to say, because you asked about the upside or the downside of it, because we're all human, but in the upside is that we lean to the good, we seek the good, because the human side could lean to the bad as well. So remembering that we're made as human, but you have to do more than know that you're made human. You have to seek the good. You have to remember that you're under the shelter of the grace. You know, it's a work to live the life that the Son of Man is telling us that we should live. There's a work to live that life that Jesus has told us to live. If we're going to forget about rules, forget about systems, there's a work to it. And so the upside is, yes, we're made human and there's good in us, but the downside is, will we do the work? And there will always be some that won't do the work.
Not everyone knows, Stephanie, that you've been with this text for so long. And thanks for bringing this to us. And you've taught so many people about it. I would want to say, as you, I'm sure, are aware, the word human in this text is entirely positive. That it's interesting that later Christianity is not so sure about humans. And want to tell us all that we're sinful and the like. By the way, there's another piece of the gospel of Mary, as you know, Stephanie, that says there is no such thing as sin.
Right.
So look at this amazing kind of profile in which the heart of the goodness and the heart of the shelter actually is fully alive human that is good in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. But remember that the part that says there is no sin also says that sin comes because of the actions of the people, right? Mm-hmm. And so what will we do with our humanity? What will we do with the power that we have? It makes me think of the infancy gospel of Thomas, where Jesus is a child and he's got all this power and he's got to learn he's got to be mature into the power that he has within him. And no, he didn't use it for malice, but he's just being, he's just being goodness. The young boy lies on him and he strikes him dead. You're no good, boom, he's dead. You know what I mean? Other boys kill the child. He brings the boy alive just to be a witness. See, tell them that I didn't do this. And so what do we do with all this goodness? And I think that's, why Mary has to remind the people, remember who you are. Remember that we were made in a good way, but remember that you got to do the work to keep the goodness going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you. Another, before we go on to the next node of meaning for our time, possibly. Anyone else want to think about this particular character of hurt and loss and restoration and being sheltered?
I would love for you to talk just a little bit more about the contrast between the fear that they're experiencing right there, as well as their consciousness of goodness. I mean, if they're conscious of good, what are they really afraid of? And if they're really afraid, are they really aware of the goodness that they were being preached about? So can you talk a little bit about why that's
Sure, yeah. Well, the way I read the text is that more or less the whole gang is afraid and lost. And there's only one person at this point who speaks up and says, stop crying. And then as they turn towards what he taught, then they find their hearts turned toward the good. So I guess I read this as saying it's basically a turnaround because of Mary's closeness to Jesus and Mary's closeness to the good news. This, of course, is also part of this amazing, for me, possibility for meaning in our time. When's the last time we heard of an ancient woman turning the crowd around and bringing all of them toward the goodness of God? Shirley, have I missed something in what you were wanting us to look at?
No, I think you're doing a good job with helping us to sort of see where we are in the place, the lives, the vibrant place of these people, that this is a real experience of them losing Jesus and not knowing what's going to happen next. And yet they've been taught about the continuity of goodness. And so I think you're explaining well, I think, what they're confronting in real life.
Can I make a brief comment about that as well? I'll keep it brief. I don't know how you noticed in John chapter 14, verses 25 through 27, Jesus talks about sending the Paraclete. And it seems to me that Mary is fulfilling the function of what Jesus talked about with respect to the Paraclete in John chapter 14. He says, when I go away, I'll send you an advocate. The Spirit will teach you all things that I told you, will remind you of those things. And peace be with you. Don't be anxious. And in this case, Mary stands up. She greets them, as if Jesus has sent Mary. She reminds them of all the words of the Savior. Jesus says, peace be with you. And then Mary says, don't weep or grieve or let your hearts be divided. Just as Jesus said, don't let your hearts be anxious. So it seems to me that Mary is fulfilling the role that Jesus promised of the Holy Spirit, and even carrying on Jesus' very own ministry to his apostles as well.
Thanks so much, Mark, on that. What that helps us do, I think, in John and in Mary, is that the Paraclete may be a person, may be a human. So a number of Johannine scholars and spiritual seekers have noticed that actually there are dimensions of John in which the Paraclete is maybe the figure of the beloved disciple himself, or the figure of Lazarus. So it's very interesting if you think of Mary as a Holy Spirit. That's already a part of another gospel in which it's never quite clear whether that Holy Spirit is actually human as well. Now, I'm aiming for yet two more points of meaning making for us. And the two are this, and I'm going to skip over the first one and get back to it, because the second one, I think, is stunningly crucial for us. So just to tell the story through, and I hope that a bunch of you know this anyway. If not, go get it. So when Mary turns their hearts to the good, they quickly remember that Jesus loved her best. And they say, hey, was it possible that you might have talked privately with Jesus and heard things we haven't? She says, well, yeah, by the way, yes. And they say, could you tell us? And then she tells this beautiful vision, or I think it's beautiful. Some of you may not. And I will come back to that, because that's more the heart of a spiritual exercise that she leads them in. But I want to go to the final, what I think, key meaning making for our time in the Gospel of Mary. And that's after Mary teaches Peter and the other followers of Jesus who've asked if she could tell something more of Jesus, then Peter and Andrew stand up and say, this is not right. This is simply what you've told us, Mary, we can't think of it as anything good. Because first of all, he would have never told a woman anything like that. And secondly, this is really bizarre stuff. And so then, since Peter, who was the one who said, please tell us, and now attacks her for what she has said from Jesus, leads some kind of revolt against her because she's a woman. Then Levi, by the way, stands up and defends her. And then he says to Peter, don't you remember that Jesus loved her better than any of us? So I want to just look at that part of the story first, or third rather, and notice this. The drama still in our day of male dominion over women and of masculine power over women is at the heart of this ancient story. And who's the good person in this story? It's the woman. It's Mary. So I just want to propose that we don't know stories like that from the Bible. This is a stunning resource in which the central character, Mary, basically plays out some of the most criminal and terrible things about our humanity now, and that is sexism. So this is an explicitly open desire for women's power and women's presence for God. And that this particular woman is attacked because of who she is. So let's now next say, how much of a resource is this? You see, you hear what I say. I think it's a big one, but let's not take my word for it. Let's just think out loud about what is it like to have a gospel that takes on sexism directly in the ancient world and in ours.
I think it's interesting that Peter is the one that diminishes Mary's voice in the same way that he becomes a representative of the church that diminished women's voices. I think the symbolism there is very intentional part of this gospel, and that the gospel is actually speaking up for the women. And Mary, of course, as you said, is the prototype for women to have a voice. And I think even in the same way that the Gospel of John is trying to compete, if that's the right word, or at least have a seat at the table with the more dominant synoptic gospels. They're both of them, both the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Mary are trying to say, we have something to say, we have something to contribute, and we need to be at the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Anyone see some problems with any of these three nodes of meaning making so far?
Well, I think one thing you might do, Hal, is to also contextualize this a little bit for us in the world that this was happening in the 2nd century. What was the dominant attitude toward women that they were confronting, let alone just among his followers, but what about the general society?
Well, we could have 4 or 5 Monday sessions on that, right? But for me, the basic overview there is, I think, only coming out in recent scholarship and recent spiritual search. Yes, primarily the larger society is male power. But the more we look at the New and the Old texts, the more we're seeing that there is a lot of very strong voices within the various Jesus peoples for a different kind of gender identity. And that the Jesus peoples are much more than we thought working on a new kind of gender identity that's very much like this gospel. The reason that we haven't been able to think about this is because there's a certain kind of literature in the Bible, and that would be the Pastoral Epistles, where women are put in their place all of the time. And that has somehow, in the larger Christian trajectory, those 4 or 5 texts, meaning books of the Bible, they say so clearly to slaves, obey your masters, and wives, obey your husbands, that we missed the very strong presence of women's leadership in a number of the Gospels, like Mary. So I'm plugging on for one more pitch here, and that is this spiritual exercise that Mary got from Jesus, told the disciples about, and got attacked for it. And I want to tell you a little bit more about this. This is basically the story of the journey of the soul to God. So what Mary tells the disciples, and Jesus told Mary, was a story about the soul going toward God, taking a journey toward God. And at different spots, the soul is challenged, and there are powers that try to stop the soul from going to God. But the soul is too smart and too alive to let that happen. And the soul finally goes to God and rests in silence. So that's a miniature version of that soul's journey to God. The one thing for me is very important is that by and large moderns think that if the soul is going to God, someone has died. What's really interesting about the ancient world is that there's a very strong set of stories, both in and outside of the Jesus movements, of people going to God without dying and then coming back. So, for instance, probably the most famous person in the Bible who does that is Paul. So Paul in 2 Corinthians says that he went to the third heaven and came back and kept on living. In other words, the reason I think that this soul in the Gospel of Mary also is a soul of a living person, not a having died person, is that the powers that try to stop the soul are psychological powers that impede living people. So it's ignorance, desire are two of the main powers that try to stop the God. Now, ignorance is something that stops humans. Desire can help or hurt humans from going towards God. The third power is anger. Like desire, anger can be both positive and negative. But in this case, it is real parts of humans, inside of humans, real insides of humans that can stop them going towards God in their living experience. And that's the story that Jesus and then Mary bring to the other followers. I would want to say that by and large here, this sounds a little bizarre to some of you. I want to suggest that this is a very interesting possibility for work in our lives. I would want to say that rather than just doing good things, this text is also interested in healing one's insides, helping one think about anger, desire, and ignorance, and how they are living in our lives. So this is a spirituality of the journey of the soul that's in the present, and that is directly given by Mary and Jesus to folks. So here again, I would see if some people can speak up for what might be problematic about this message or helpful.
Well, speaking as a transgender woman, I'm really struck by this passage. In fact, by the whole gospel and the way that you've interpreted it, Hal, because it echoes with my own personal journey to actually embrace who I am and to move through the fear of the retribution from the outside world into trusting who I am and to embracing it. And so I think your interpretation of the vision is very much spot on, at least in terms of how it I feel in terms of my own journey.
Well, thank you so much, Anita, for bringing your own journey into this larger metaphor of journey. And that's a very powerful thing that you brought. Let's see if there's anyone who would like to say another response, maybe some questioning of this vision of a journey to God.
Hi, Hal. This is Kirsten.
Hi, Kirsten.
Thank you so much for this wonderful. I've had the Gospel of Mary on my bookcase and read it a number of times, including also listening to a couple of talks on it. But I don't think what you just said is strange at all. In my journey, it definitely is the wrong kind of desire or hate or anger, all those things that want to come in and try to keep me from that beautiful soul journey. And I've proved it in so many ways in my life by letting go of that. And also, really going like Mary saying, just stop it. Your innate nature is this perfection. And why would I allow anything to come in that would keep me from that soul journey of coming to the Father? So I don't think what you said was strange at all. So thank you.
Thank you. I think one thing I've been working on quite a bit is the powers of anger and desire. And look, if you can, at the text closely, because when the powers try to stop the soul, it's with conversation and with its interaction. And it seems to me that there's a decent chance that both anger and desire can be good or bad. And so that arguing between the soul and the powers that are trying to stop the soul may indeed be about not all anger is bad or all desire is bad, but you need to argue with a power to see how you get to God with as a person who sometimes has anger and desire. And the desire and the anger may be easily part of how you would go to God if you can argue that through. Clearly, desire and anger often hurt us and stop us, but there may be an interaction with a power that is in our lives to decide when anger and desire can be helpful or hurtful.
Well, there's righteous anger, right? And a desire for justice. Those are two powerful, positive ways to describe anger and desire. Yeah. I wanted to mention that the Peter and Andrew attacking Mary because she's a woman and they don't believe it. It just reminds me of when she finds Jesus at the resurrection and the disciples don't believe her. It's the same reaction.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that we've gotten a good start with Mary by and large. Like all kinds of texts that can help us a lot, there are clearly reasons for one to not take everything at face value and read them deeply to see where they help and where they might not. So thanks a lot for beginning that kind of inquiry and look for present day spiritual aliveness and intellectual curiosity can happen.
Thanks so much, Hal. That was really, really stimulating to us. I think all of us have a lot more questions now, which would be great for us to be able to ask. I want to remind you that we really welcome your thoughts, your questions, your comments on the Facebook page, on the Early Christian Text Conversation page. And if there's some good questions there, I can pass them along to Hal, who will answer us there too. But I think we could go on and on with this one, Hal. Thank you so much. So I want to just have a little closeout here for us. So I want to thank everybody, first of all, for your contribution. This was the December 2020 Tanho Monday Textual Studies discussion on the Gospel of Mary, led by Dr. Hal Taussig. Once a month from 8 to 9 Eastern Time on Monday nights, generally the 4th of the month, we provide a discussion of one of the early Christian texts. Dr. Hal Taussig leads these sessions, sharing a well-framed overview of a particular text and allowing participants time to ask questions and share their insights. Don't forget that donations supporting the creation of these textual study archives really are appreciated. To donate, simply click on the Tanho Monday Textual Studies button on the Early Christian Text homepage. You'll also find the donation button directly to Early Christian Texts so that we can keep on hosting the website. Thanks so much, everybody.